Hi, Mike Pelonzi here with another episode of Safe and Sound. Today we have a special guest, Richard Chambers from Chambers Law Offices in Linfield. The reason I asked him here, as you all know, I own and operate Safety Academy USA in Beverly, and we do firearms training and licensing. And firearms licensing is at an all-time high. We're getting a whole array of groups of people, mothers, daughters, fathers, sons. A lot of people are afraid these days, so there's a lot of unrest in the world. And I tell, they all come to me looking to learn how to protect themselves with firearms. And I explain to them right on the side, I go, listen, when it comes to a firearm, there's three things you have to take into account. You have to get mentally prepared, physically prepared on how to use the gun safely, and legally prepared. I can only do two of those. I can get you mentally prepared, I can get you physically prepared, I can teach you how to use your gun properly, how to carry concealed properly, how not to violate any of the carry conceal laws in Massachusetts, how to store it in the home so children and people that should not have access to firearms have access to it, and how to keep it locked up safely. But I cannot do the legal part, and that's where I asked Richard Chambers to come in and talk about some of the things that he's seen. He is one of the most successful two-way lawyers in Massachusetts. He's won cases at the state and federal level. And I just want to talk to you, Rich, about things you've seen and mistakes people made and how they don't understand that when the use of force or when the threat stops, the use of force has to stop, and that they cannot exceed that use of force when a threat is being used against them. And appreciate you coming in. Thank you very much. So tell me, what do people not understand about the legality about using force to protect their loved ones?
Well, first, Mike, thanks for having me. This is a subject that's really close to my heart, and I appreciate all the hard work you do training people. But just like you said, you can only take them to a certain level, and the problem is we live in a state that is actually anti-gun. Massachusetts has so many laws on the books, and then now they just passed a new law. It's very difficult to understand. But the bottom line is, as a gun owner, you have to understand, once you're trained and once you have that firearm in your home, you really, really have to think about when you should use it. And you talk about use of force. One of the things, I'm a licensed firearm owner. I have a concealed carry. I've had one for 25 years. Coming over to the studio today, I'm not carrying. I don't carry. And you might say, well, why? You have your license. It's supposed to be one of your fundamental rights is self-defense. Why aren't you carrying, Mr. Chambers? Because I might have to use it, God forbid. And if I do, I risk a lot of things. I risk a lawsuit. I risk losing my license for actually defending myself in Massachusetts. So the legalities are complex, and the best course of action in Massachusetts is not to use it unless you're left with no other choice, and it comes down to a split-second decision: is it going to save your life?
And in Massachusetts, if you're outside your home, and we'll talk about inside the home later on in the show, you have a duty, any reasonable means of retreat or escape, you have a duty to retreat. You cannot actively engage a threat, correct?
That is correct, Mike. And as I had mentioned, I've represented so many people in Massachusetts that they think, okay, I have my concealed carry. It's okay to carry it while I'm driving down the street, to have it on me when I'm in my car. And many, many people, I can think of one that just called my law office recently. They went into a store to use the bathroom. They left the firearm in their car. Somebody broke in and stole it. Now they're facing criminal prosecution as well as probably a lifetime suspension or loss of their license just because they had it on them.
And they left that firearm
in their car. And they left it unattended in their vehicle.
And we are responsible for our firearms wherever we go, and wherever the firearm is, we're still responsible, which is why I tell my students, carrying a firearm is a pain in the neck, to be polite. It's an inconvenience of expense and time. The expense is properly training how to carry, and we train with, when you tell me you want to carry a certain type of gun, I would have you buy a dummy gun, a training gun, known as a blue gun or yellow, and we would train with that gun in the classroom with whatever clothes you're going to wear. And I have all the different drills because, as you know, you cannot expose the gun. Exposing a gun, even showing a gun to get rid of a threat, can conceived as assault with a dangerous weapon.
That's a
correct?
good point that you bring up, because what people don't understand also is Massachusetts has a concealed carry permit, not an open carry. So I've actually had cases where people are in a store, in a dressing room, trying on a blazer. They have a concealed carry. Someone in the public sees it and calls the police, and that's called brandishing. And that can actually be considered a crime because you put people in fear.
Exactly. Not to do it on the public is the way they word it in the law. And unfortunately, we don't live in a state where, and I say this in my class, I do classes during the week at night. No one goes to work the next day and says, you can't believe this, I took a great firearms class last night. You know, it's called water cooler talk. Firearms are not water cooler talk in Massachusetts. Texas, they may brag about the classes and shooting they've done, but in Massachusetts, you'd be hard-pressed to see someone in an office building go in the next day and talk about their firearms training, which is kind of sad because it is a great sport and does bring people together. And at the end of the day, it is a sport. Another thing I hear, and I hate this, and other instructors have kind of shied away from me, I hate the whole, a good guy with a gun stops a bad guy with a gun. People do not know who the undercover agents are in the world. We know each other, you know your family. If you're forced to use a firearm to protect them, I can understand that, I can appreciate it. I'm going to have you explain the time frame and the cost of that. But if you think you're going to save someone from being attacked, you don't know if the person that's pointing the gun is an undercover officer trying to effect an arrest or not. And the last thing you need to do is engage that undercover officer. So, weigh in on that. People think they're trying to be heroes, they're trying to help people. We'd all like to be able to help everyone, but the reality is we can't, especially with a firearm, because we're going to be held to a different standard, correct?
Yeah, no, that's correct. You mentioned a whole bunch of topics, but one of the things is, like I tell my kids, stay out of it. You don't know the situation. You don't know what's happening. First of all, if you're walking down the street and you see someone pull a firearm on someone else, might be well advised to go the other way. Because if you interject yourself into the situation, now you're taking a great legal risk in many factors. One is, like we talked about, brandishing your firearm, even showing you have it. Because you yourself in that situation are not under the threat of force. And defense of others is very subjective defense, and it doesn't always work. Because you would have to show in a court of law, if you were to brandish your firearm and use it negligently, and you were to get charged, you'd have to, that's what's called an affirmative defense, and you'd have to say, I really thought that person was going to be hurt or injured, and how can you say that? And you talked about retreating. So that's why I say, stay out of it, go the other direction, unless you really, really believe you're going to take a chance, and that chance might save a life, and that's a decision that you only have a couple of seconds to make.
And in a couple of seconds, when we talk about deadly force, which we're talking with a firearm, those people that come to you, I'm sure you ask them, did the person you shoot have the ability, means, and intent of causing you serious bodily injury and or death to yourself or another? And now, yes, they did. Well, how can you prove that?
Well, and that's one of the definitions of self-defense in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is that amount of force which is reasonable and necessary. Very subjective. And usually comes down to someone's making a direct threat against you. They brandish a firearm, they point it at you. Then if you were to, in that split second, say, look, I'm a concealed carry owner, I have a firearm, I have to now use this in self-defense to save my life. It's that amount of force which is reasonable and necessary. So if someone has a firearm and you can then say, well, I pulled a firearm as a deterrence. If they have a knife, is that the same amount of force that is reasonable and necessary? Maybe not. What if it's a big guy and he comes at you with a fist? Duty in Massachusetts is to retreat. Were you to pull the firearm, you may not be able to use the self-defense because it's not that amount of force which is reasonable and necessary to de-escalate the situation.
And de-escalation is going to be a part of the new curriculum I hear that they passed.
It is. And it actually, believe it or not, for a state that, in my opinion, as a Second Amendment attorney, it's a very difficult state. They're actually anti-gun in a lot of ways. And you know, when you give people a course and they say, hey, I'm going to have to go down to the police station and apply, a lot of people have issues.
And also in that, going back to de-escalation, you have to be an innocent party. You can't be out there trying to look for trouble. You know, the way I teach in my situation awareness classes, we are on our life path with our friends or family or just by ourselves, no intention of having a confrontation, and this threat comes at us. And now what do? Well, if we can leave in, like this building, if we walk out to our cars and there's a problem, the law would expect us, and correct me if I'm wrong, to walk back in here and call the police as opposed to engaging that problem, correct?
Correct. In a court of law, there's been a lot of times I've had to defend people. And one of these pretty famous cases was actually a police officer off duty. And a bad guy had a gun that was not licensed. The police officer had a licensed gun, a Glock. No, you may not be able to own those anymore because of the large capacity, but he had 3 mags with 15 rounds. He defended himself. It turned into a fight. In court, the judge actually chastised him and said, that was excessive force because you were carrying a firearm with so many rounds. He was actually charged with excessive force and assault when he defended himself. So that's what you risk.
And that's a sworn police officer?
A police officer.
Trained?
Trained and off duty.
No. And off duty.
Imagine if it was a civilian.
And when we say off duty, but according to most policies with departments, you're never off duty. They have a duty to act if they see something.
And that's true, and that's what happened in this case. And there was a trial, and like I said, here's a police officer who acted, saved lives, and ended up having the expense of having to go through hire an attorney and go through a jury trial to save his liberty. Because not only as a police officer, he was facing a criminal record, jail time, as well as lifetime loss of his license to carry and his badge.
You sure we're an anti-gun state with all that you're saying?
I would suggest Massachusetts, one of the topics maybe for another day should be reciprocity, and when you're a licensed gun owner. But I can tell you right now, I'm representing someone who had a concealed carry legal in Michigan, moved to Massachusetts, was in the process of applying for his concealed carry in Massachusetts, and was subsequently charged and is facing felony charges because he brought into the state an AR and a pistol, and he was not licensed in Massachusetts. Other states, it would not be a problem.
And before I ask this next question, quickly explain when you say felony. Felony as opposed to not felony crime, the difference between I know the difference, but in layman's terms, so that people knowing, if you're charged with felony, it's much more severe because you're looking at...
Yeah. Universally throughout the country, you may hear like felon in possession. What that means is anyone who is convicted of a crime that has a penalty of a year or more in state prison. In Massachusetts, you could get, like we're in Beverly right now, you could be charged by the Beverly police under a misdemeanor, and worst case scenario, you're not looking at a jail sentence of more than a year, and you may end up going to what's called the House of Correction, which would be Middleton. If you're charged with a felony, you get indicted, and you're looking at state prison, which is a much more severe sentence. And as a felon, when you're branded a felon, there's laws throughout the country, federal laws, that say a felon can never have a firearms license.
This is pretty severe as opposed to being charged with something less.
Now, I will say this, in Massachusetts, there's a number of laws like driving under the influence, what we call OUI, operating under the influence of Mass. That's a misdemeanor. But if you're charged with that offense in Massachusetts and you take a plea or you have a conviction, it's actually a lifetime, as a misdemeanor, it's a lifetime, you cannot ever have a gun license.
Really?
So there are many misdemeanors in Massachusetts that if you get charged with, they're considered felonies by the ATF because the sentence, like on an OUI, is up to 2.5 years in state prison. Strike that, up to 2.5 years. They don't say which, so it could be dual. You could be indicted. It could be either House of Correction or state prison.
But if someone leaves a wedding, had a few too many, doesn't hit anyone, just swerving, gets pulled over, they could be in jeopardy of losing their license for life and going to jail.
Oh, and it gets better. Yes, and just being charged. Let's say you're out to dinner with your significant other, you have a glass of wine, you have a meal. I'm a big guy. I feel like I'm fine. I get pulled over. I get charged on suspicion. You know, in order to be charged with a crime, that's something else. All the police need is what's called probable cause, which just, all that means is more likely than not. The probable cause standard is way down here. Later on, when you get an attorney and you go to trial, it's reasonable doubt standard, which is way, way high. But all they need is probable cause. So let's say you get pulled over as a gun owner. You don't even have your firearm on you. It's home. It's in the safe. It's locked up. Like everything's in compliance. You'll get a letter in the mail that your license is suspended because you were charged with a crime. You'll have to then either get a knock at the door or receive the letter, go to the police station and surrender your license and your firearms, just for being charged.
So I think the lesson there is drink at home, have a seltzer and lime out in the world.
Well, I even have a better suggestion for everyone. When I had a client come to my office yesterday to represent him in an OUI, and I said, well, you know now you can't drive. Until the case gets sorted out, they took your license. So there's this app called Uber.
Yes. Yes, there is. Never had that years ago.
We didn't have that.
No.
Exactly.
So let's shift gears. We talked about protecting ourselves outside. We're home. 2 in the morning, you hear a crash, you hear a problem. In Massachusetts, you cannot have a loaded rifle or shotgun in your house, but now you could have a loaded firearm in a gun safe. Some people I know do have quick release gun safes in their bedrooms with a loaded handgun. Many problems with that.
Yeah, that's my biggest fear as a licensed gun owner. And when you hear that crash, do you go for the firearm? The instinct, the gut instinct is somebody's in my house, possibly there's an intruder. Are they armed? I'm going to go for my firearm. The problem is, like we talked about earlier, is that person going to be an imminent threat to you? You have to set the situation. Were you to use your firearm, and let's just say you're in your home and you don't have a duty to retreat, the problem is the law would say you should go to a safe, retreat to a safe spot and call them. Call 911. You're not a police officer.
And you cannot use deadly force to protect property.
No,
Just life.
Unless you live in the state of Texas, which we talked about.
Yes. And this is going to upset a lot of people. It upsets me. I love dogs more than I love most people. That in Massachusetts, a dog is property, not a family member. So you cannot protect a dog in your home with a firearm.
Yeah, I think about that as well because I happen to be a German Shepherd owner. And when I hear that crash, I figure my dog's going to be the first one down there, letting me know what's going on and maybe scaring that person and getting that person to get the heck out of the house. But what if that person's armed and tries to hurt my dog? That's a decision you have to make. And like you said, it's not justified if I were to run downstairs with a loaded firearm, shoot someone because they hurt my dog. Morally and ethically, maybe you feel like you have a duty to do that because the dog's a family member, but you're the one who's going to be charged with assault. Believe it or not the person that broke into your house.
There's a lot of cases where the homeowner has been charged along with the person committing the crime in Massachusetts.
That's right.
And you worked on one where someone was attacked on their own property, stealing tools out, and you don't have to mention any names, but if you want to summarize that, what that person went through.
Yeah, that's one of these where people heard it. It was in the media. It got some attention, thank goodness. But this is a guy that was without saying any names like you said, but he was a blue-collar mason, brick worker. He had a truck parked out in front of his house with all his tools. Someone actually broke into the truck, and he was sleeping downstairs. He heard the person breaking into his truck, immediately opened the door, confronted him on his property. What are you doing? You're breaking into my truck. That person pulled a knife. My client literally protected himself with his hands, self-defense. We talked about that amount of force which is reasonable and necessary. Someone comes at you with a knife. He didn't have a firearm or a weapon on him. He ended up punching that person. Because he assaulted that person when the police showed up, they asked the alleged victim, which I would call the criminal, does he want to press charges against my client? And he did. And my client was charged with assault and battery by means of a your fist against someone who had a knife and was breaking into his truck and in the process of stealing his work tools. And I say, like, only in Massachusetts, but no,
yeah.
it would happen in New Jersey and New York and California as well.
Exactly. And I tell people, stay in your home. Any one of us would have done the same thing. We see something in our yard, our driveway, we walk and say, hey, what are you doing? But when we leave our home, unfortunately, we become the assailant. Somehow we become the bad guy against the bad guy. And fortunately, that ended up okay. But it cost him
a lot of money and time and liberty and going to court for over a year. And, you know, you made a good point. A lot of us have what's called bravado or that alpha male syndrome, and it's like, hey, this guy's doing this, I'm going to confront him. I'm tough. That's your adrenaline's going, that's your instinct. But the bottom line is, I had a juror, when they were talking about whether my client should be held without bail or not on what we call a dangerousness hearing in Massachusetts, I had a judge actually chastise my client and say, yeah, I heard everything your lawyer just said. You should have stayed in the house and called the police yourself. Why didn't you call 911? It got flipped.
Yes. And that's what I tell my students, and I try to tell everyone, and that's why this is so important. People don't understand. In common sense, I can go out in my yard and protect something that I own, but you cannot.
No.
You just, I'm sure the money he spent on that case, he could replace every tool in his truck.
Absolutely, without a doubt. Would it cost him for a retainer for an attorney and the loss of work, going back and forth to court and fighting for his liberty? Could have bought a brand new truck.
That is very sad. So in this great transition, I want to talk about, he didn't have a gun.
No.
I shoot someone, inside or outside. Time frame, the court time, and my legal cost.
Well, I'm sure you all have heard about the Karen Reed trial that's going on. And you know how much she has spent on attorneys, etc. She didn't shoot anyone, okay? The problem is, when you're a firearm owner, you've got a lot of responsibility. You have the ability, right, to take a life. And we talked about what's called use of force. And should you decide, it might take a split second to make that decision, what you're facing is a murder charge. I actually represented somebody that literally pulled up to their driveway because they went to Wendy's at 1 in the morning. An assailant was waiting for them with a mask and a sawed-off shotgun, put the gun to his head, made him take him in his own house, was going to probably rob him or kill him, who knows. They got halfway up the stairs. My client had a concealed carry, and that's something we haven't talked about, is that he happened to have a 6-shooter pistol as opposed to automatic. Reached into his pocket when the bad guy turned his head for a second, pulled out his pistol and shot him. The bad guy fell. Now, I believe my client did everything right. He took his cell phone, he immediately called the police, 911, and said, I was just held up at gunpoint and I shot someone. Took his gun, put it on the ground, and waited for 911. I got a call at 2 in the morning that my client was down at the police station. After I showed up, he was interviewed by the state police detective. They were deciding whether they're going to have probable cause to charge my client with murder. The state trooper literally said to me, someone's going to get charged with murder tonight. It's not going to be your client, because he did everything right by the book. There was no excessive force. It was one shot.
And that happened. He was brought into his house at gunpoint and
into
defended
his
himself.
House. That's one of the rare situations in Massachusetts where he was judged as doing the right thing. And that's where someone had a sawed-off shotgun to his head.
I shoot someone in my house. I have my license to carry. They break in. Say we can prove ability, means, and intent, that he was deranged, he had a weapon, he was just there to kill a family, he picked my family. How much court time am I looking at? How much money am I going to pay you?
You're looking at, almost no matter how it plays out, you're looking at loss of your license to carry. You're looking at at the minimum, a clerk's hearing to determine probable cause. And I said that standard's very low. Most clerks would say it's just whether it happened or not, and it doesn't mean you're guilty, but we're going to issue the charges. Charges get issued, It might take a year or more in court until you get a hearing, an evidentiary hearing in front of someone, and your case gets dismissed. It could cost you upwards to $30,000, $40,000. And that's prior to getting charged with murder.
That's best case scenario.
That's best case
it goes
scenario.
away, 30, 40,000.
It goes away, and then let's not forget. Now you have to hire an attorney, someone like myself that specializes in Second Amendment law, because guess what? You lost your gun license. Now you have to reapply and ask for a hearing in front of a judge. It's called a petition for judicial review, and request that your gun license be restored. And the problem in Massachusetts is it's really up to the discretion of the chief, and he has what's called, he could say that I'm not giving it back to Michael because someone was shot, even though he was charged and acquitted, because I don't think now he's a suitable person to have it.
And is that the end of it? Is there any appeal to that?
No, there's an appeal, and I've done many of them. And luckily in Massachusetts for years, judges used to say, well, Mr. Chambers, tell me, under what legal theory you think your client should have their firearms restored? And despite me saying the Second Amendment and the Bill of Rights, we actually had a good case that came down for gun owners recently out of New York called Bruin. And that says that chiefs of police and judges, when deciding whether, given the discretion to restore someone's Second Amendment rights, it should be looked at as the founding fathers looked at it back in the day. A lot of judges won't apply it still, but that is the standard.
And that is a landmark case. I read that case. That was a great victory for all gun owners, really, in America. Yeah,
and it's been working in Massachusetts a little bit, and they're starting to understand that they have to apply the Bruin standard as opposed to the arbitrary and capricious standard.
Excellent. Good for us. Win for us.
That is a win for us.
We have been talking, believe it or not, almost half an hour. And this is the point where I usually tell my viewers I do a tip of the day on the subject we've been talking. There's no better person to come up with a tip of the day than you, Mr. Chambers. So, tip of the day for our viewers,
well,
according to what do you say to them?
Well, I would say this. Based on my 25 years of being a criminal defense attorney, 22, 23 years specializing in the Second Amendment, my being a licensed and registered concealed carry owner, once you get your license to carry in Massachusetts, with great power comes great responsibility. I'm sure you've heard that out many times before. And it's a privilege to be a gun owner, especially in Massachusetts where you're given a concealed carry. And even though I believe it's a Second Amendment right, a fundamental right, Massachusetts looks at it as a privilege. So you need to really, really think twice, think about everything we said, and for the most part, look to deterrence as opposed to offensive use of your firearm.
Wow. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right. Well, that was a great show. A lot of information. We're going to be putting Attorney Chambers' information up on the screen. Our office is in Linfield. And I, again, want to thank you for coming in. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
I also want to thank Chris Harvey and Michelle Lopez, who work behind the scenes. And you can't see her, but as usual, she's always in. My beautiful wife, Lisa, taking some pictures. And that's it for now. I will see you on the next show. Thank you.